Hi there, everybody. What I'm going to do today is show you a record that that I got secondhand from a friend, and it tells the history of Thunder Bay, and I found it kind of interesting. So, it's really sort of animated the way the narrator tells the story. So I'm not going to talk for long here or anything. I'm just going to bring you right into it. The record has 4 tracks on it, so this will be a 4-part video. So you'll have to navigate to the next one to hear the next part of the story, etc., etc. Really quickly, here's the cover. And the record itself. Low lighting, sorry about this. And without further ado, I'll set the camera down and let it film. Okay. It should be okay right there. Enjoy part 1. The record starts off with a weird squealing sound, which is supposed to be birds, so just get past that. It's about 10-15 seconds long or so. And if the needle would lay on the record, that'd be good too. Enjoy!
January 1st, 1970. 2 cities are united. 2 cities with a common heritage almost as old as the land itself. For more than 100,000 people, it is a time to move forward with renewed strength, and a time to gaze back with pride along the streams of history. January 1st, 1970. A time to remember. Began long ago, way upstream on the rivers of the past, when white men came to the land of Nanabiju. Strange men, as strong as bears and as fierce as wolves. Hungry men, hungry for the skins of beaver and mink and otter. Men with names the Ojibwe couldn't pronounce: Radisson and Grashey, Duluth and Lavarandre. They searched for 1,000 miles, but they stopped here, and beside the towering granite mountain where the thunderbirds nested, they planted a flag, built a trading post, and called it Fort Kaministiquia. That was back in 1678. There were other fur traders, and later settlers, and they were searching too, searching for metals and timber and land. They found it, and they stayed. They changed the name of their settlement to New Fort, then changed it again to Fort William in honor of William McGilvray. Years later, in the hills a few miles north, a man named Simon Dawson made his camp. From there, he blazed a trail toward the west for men to follow. And they came, not pioneers to try the wilderness of empty plains, but soldiers of Her Majesty the Queen marching against the Métis of Riel. In 1870, they encamped at Dawson's Station. Before they left, their colonel, Garnet Wolseley, had rechristened it Prince Arthur's Landing. Remote, alone, perched on an inland sea, battered by winter gales and heavy snows, the 2 communities grew slowly. From the first, they were as proud and independent as the men who founded them. Divided by a few square miles of brush and muskeg, they remained aloof from one another. Only in John McPherson's wagon could the few reluctant travelers pass back and forth. And oh, the stories of those early years when citizens discovered that they stood on streets of silver, what the Indians called shunya. Why, on Water Street they plucked it from the ground and filled a tea case with it. By 1868, the cry went out. Silver, the precious metal, was everywhere, and soon the islands in the bay, the hills, even the streets of Prince Arthur's Landing rang to the thud of miners' picks. But there was more. Free gold discovered by Indians and claimed by the McKellars, and huge chunks of green raw copper. Iron, why, the hills were heavy with it. But the iron wasn't needed. Not then. In Instead, Alexander Mackenzie and the Canadian Pacific Railroad Company brought more iron to the head of the lakes, iron rails that would eventually span a continent. In 1875, the railway began to move west out of Fort William. The citizens of Prince Arthur's Landing were indignant. Oh, sure, they were profiting from the sale of supplies to the CPR, but the line began and ended in Fort William. Fort William, of all places. They grumbled, they shouted, they demanded. But they were ignored. Somehow Mackenzie and his government in Ottawa didn't understand, didn't realize that there was more at stake than dollars and cents. It was a matter of pride. For the Hill City residents, there was only one solution. They formed their own railroad company, the Prince Arthur's Landing and Kaministiquia Railway, and in the dead of night, sent out a work crew to lay 7 miles of track. By morning, they were linked to the Canadian Pacific. Yes, they had pride, those pioneers, and courage. And if the two young towns fought each other, well, they didn't hesitate to square off against the industrial giants of the East. You'd imagine the CPR would have learnt its lesson by 1889, would have understood the people of Thunder Bay. But no, the railroad refused to pay back taxes on its Port Arthur depot, and the first mayor of the newly incorporated town, Thomas H. Gorham, and his council went into action. They seized a train from Vancouver loaded with Japanese silk and chained the drive wheel, just in case. They tethered that iron horse for 2 hours until the railroad cried uncle, and its president, William Van Horn, shouted that a damned little village has seized a CPR train and ruined our credit. And if he added that he'd lived to see the day when grass grew in the streets of Port Arthur, if he said it, he was a poor prophet and a worse judge of character. Of course, Van Horn had his revenge. He moved the terminal to Fort William, and Port Arthur became just another station on the line, for a time. But the railroad had reached Winnipeg in 1882, and soon the prairie harvests poured into the lakehead. Wheat, barley, rye, grain enough to fill the bay, to blanket the sleeping giant. The first grain elevator was built in 1883. Then another was built, and another, each one bigger than the last, until the waterfront was lined with their skyscraping concrete. The poet Rudyard Kipling looked up in awestruck wonder at them. He called them castles of commerce, and commented, "Two towns stand on the shores of the lake less than a mile apart. What Lloyd's is to shipping, or the College of Surgeons is to medicine, that they are to the wheat." But Kipling added, "They hate each other with the pure, poisonous, passionate hatred which makes towns grow." That was how Kipling saw the Twin Cities, way back then on the rivers of the past.
Stay tuned for part 2.